Disclaimer: in this video you'll find lots of speculation, lots of conjecture, and a little bit of evidence. Oh, and spoilers, those two. You've been warned. If you've seen Clannad and Clannad After Story, you'll know there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens that might not be entirely clear after your first viewing. It's a series that relies on your recollection of plot devices and scenes that you may have forgotten by the end, at least if you're anything like me. It's incredible how, if you rewatch the series taking into account the info you've received from the entire story, there's a lot you'll pick up on that you may have missed the first time around. I highlighted this in my previous Clannad video, but I feel like it's necessary to break apart the various mysteries surrounding the series since it can be confusing.
Dango, 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 Dango.
Let's briefly examine what happened in the final episode of Clannad After Story. In small palms, it's revealed after all this time that the girl in the Illusionary World and the garbage doll were none other than an older Ushio and Tomoya respectively. Ushio explains that she's unable to leave this world because if she did, the lights would turn to despair. Tomoya reappears on the hill where he first met Nagisa, and he's given the chance to ignore her and prevent the pain and heartbreak he's gone through since first meeting her, but he chooses to acknowledge her instead, which sends him back to the moment of Ushio's birth. Nagisa miraculously survives this time, giving the family a second chance at a happy life together. So, how is this not a Deus Ex Machina after all the horrific and nightmarish circumstances that led us here? If you've only seen the series once, you might have walked away unsatisfied, and without that added layer of depth that comes with analyzing all the circumstances surrounding Nagisa's death and revival, I might have agreed with you. I'd like to take us back to the very first episode of the series, back to Nagisa and Tomoya's supposed first meeting, where we'll find that it's actually not their first meeting at all.
Dango, 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 Dango.
In starting up the first episode, we're greeted with Tomoya's first lines of the series.
I hate this town. It's too filled with memories I'd rather forget. I go to school every day, hang out with my friends, and then I go home. There's no place I'd rather not go ever again. I wonder if anything will ever change. Will that day ever come?
It's not all that difficult to see someone like Tomoya who's been forced into a corner by circumstance saying something like this, but there are some inconsistencies. First of all, he mentions that he hates this town because it's filled with memories he'd rather forget. I wonder what memories he's talking about, especially since the only memory we're aware of that he'd resent his town over is the fight with his father that ruined his right arm. Sure, I'll concede that's a serious thing that might spark this line, but he explicitly says memories, so there has to be more than just that, right? Also, when the series begins, Tomoya only has one friend, Tsunohara, so it seems odd to me that he'd use the plural friends here. Sure, you could say that he might mean the Fujibayashi sisters, but they didn't really seem like actual friends until later in the series, and I doubt he'd hang out with them unless he had an ulterior motive. What if this line is actually spoken by Tomoya years into the future, the version who's lost his wife and daughter? Sure, the reference to going to school every day might put a stake in this idea, but outside of that, each and every line he says can be applied to his life in the latter half of After Story. You could just as easily substitute work in for school and there wouldn't be an issue. I'd be willing to suggest this entire scene is foreshadowing the moment when time is about to turn backwards and Tomoya is placed on the hill where he can either ignore Nagisa or embrace her. It's important to note when making this point that the entire scene is rendered in a dreamlike filter which would support this theory. It would of course mean that the first scene in the series never happened in reality, but it would also connect the first and last episodes in a profound way. Moving on, Nagisa's first line has some support for this theory.
Do you like this school? I have to say that I love it very, very much. But soon everything changes. Well, at least it does eventually. Fun things, happy things, they'll all eventually change someday, you know? But can you still love this place?
In this situation, I'm going to suggest that the school is meant to symbolize Nagisa's life, which is indeed something she loves very much, but it'll soon change in more ways than one. In this moment, Nagisa is asking Tomoya if he can still love her, even with the knowledge that she'll die someday. Let's take it one step further by highlighting what Tomoya says in between these two lines.
A girl I don't know. She isn't talking to me. She's probably talking to someone in her heart.
If this theory is true, and I believe it is, then it could be that this person in her heart is in fact Tomoya from the future, but because this scene takes place outside of time and space, that might not be the Tomoya we see on screen. In response to Nagisa's question, Tomoya says,
Just go and find more. All you have to do is find other fun and happy things. It's not so hard. Come on, let's go.
This sparks a change in the dreamlike filter, which fades away as the music swells into the chorus, while Nagisa looks surprised, almost relieved. I don't think the music would do that in this situation unless it was something incredibly important. Sure, you could say that this is the moment her life begins to change, but I find this scene to be odd when you take into account the next time Tomoya meets Nagisa, she asks him the same question she asked on the hill, and he doesn't ask why she's repeating herself. I strongly believe the scene atop the hill is foreshadowing the crux of the series. Do you regret meeting the love of your life if not meeting her might help her survive? This, of course, would suggest that their first meeting was actually later when Tomoya eats lunch with Nagisa, and as I said, she asks him,
Let me ask you, do you like this school very much?
I'd also be willing to suggest that if the Tomoya who appears on the hill is actually the one we know and love, perhaps the scene is actually his dream, which might explain why he remembers Nagisa saying Anpan despite seemingly not knowing where he heard the word. It would also explain why the scene on the hill doesn't play out in the same way as it does at the end of the series. In rewatching episode 9 of After Story, there's a small piece of evidence in regards to this theory that I feel I should mention. When Tomoya is remembering his memories of attending high school with Nagisa, he actively remembers her saying Anpan on the hill. While this could easily be explained as him remembering his dream, this could be the only piece that sinks this idea. It sinks the idea even more in episode 13 of After Story when Nagisa explicitly mentions meeting Tomoya at the bottom of the hill. However, it does need to be said that in episode 21 of After Story, Tomoya repeats his opening monologue word for word, which might support this theory? I can't tell, there's too much conflicting evidence to say definitively.
Dango, 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 Dango.
I'd like to switch gears in order to discuss the Illusionary World, as it's something we see countless times throughout the series and is left intentionally ambiguous. If it wasn't obvious, the girl in the Illusionary World is an older version of Ushio, and if you really look at her face, it is the same face as the 5-year-old Ushio. As I said, the garbage doll is Tomoya, but what exactly is the Illusionary World? I've heard theories that it's some kind of afterlife. I've also wondered if it wasn't the pocket dimension discovered by Kotomi's parents before their untimely demise. If the Illusionary World is an afterlife, this would explain why Ushio was there. After all, she, like her mother, was tied to the town and destined to die alongside it. Since it can be assumed the Illusionary World is outside the bounds of time and space, this explains why she's older than she was when she died, but it doesn't explain why, for example, Nagisa isn't there or Kotomi's parents aren't there. I imagine you can make the argument that the Illusionary World is different for everyone, but if that's the case, then why isn't Tomoya in his own Illusionary World if he had to die in order to travel there? If this theory is true, it'd support the idea that Tomoya did in fact die, whether via suicide or otherwise. It doesn't matter how it happened. If the Illusionary World is an afterlife, then Tomoya had to die in order to get there. However, something to point out is that since the summary episode proves Tomoya has memories of losing Nagisa and Ushio, he'd definitely have memories of committing suicide if that's actually what he did. If the Illusionary World is, rather, a pocket dimension, this would explain why nobody else was there besides Ushio. Since Nagisa and later Ushio are tied to the town, then it could be that they're the only ones who could have traveled to the Illusionary World, which would explain why Tomoya, or the garbage doll, couldn't have gone there by himself. He needed a strong will to see his daughter again, and her life-giving abilities in order to stay in that realm. It could also be that he needed the power of the light orbs that were gathered in order to be there as well. I'll be moving forward under the assumption that this is the more likely scenario. I feel like if this wasn't the case, they wouldn't have delved so deep into the research Kotomi's parents were conducting, especially since the concept doesn't really go anywhere for the rest of the series. I think it needs to be said that the Illusionary World isn't guaranteed to look like it does. Imagine a cardboard box sitting in the middle of an empty room. If you put a bunch of shoes in the box, it becomes your shoe box. If you take the shoes out, it's still a box, but its purpose may change depending on what you put inside it. Through this analogy, it can be assumed that the pocket dimension is the box, and the illusionary world we see throughout the series is what Ushio decided to put inside it.
Dango, 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 Dango.
I believe we need to discuss the parameters of Nagisa's, and later Ushio's, death before we move any further. It's very clear that, in some way, shape, or form, Nagisa was indeed tied with the town of Hikarizaka. In episode 15 of After Story, Akio tells Tomoya that when Nagisa was on the brink of death when she was a child, he desperately took her to a random field in the town and begged anyone or anything who would listen for his daughter to survive. It worked.
Then all of a sudden it was like the grass and the trees and the sun enveloped Nagisa with its warm light. Ever since then, I've tried to keep an eye on this place. I almost feel like it's another part of Nagisa.
This idea is further explored when Ushio gets sick in episode 21 of After Story, when Tomoya suggests that the people of Hikarizaka are sacrificing nature in order to grow.
I had a weird thought. You said you brought Nagisa here when she was dying. Maybe when she got better, she and the town were bound together in some way. And now her daughter's bound to this place too. Maybe this town is in pain. Maybe all this change is causing it. Do you think their sickness could be a reflection of that?
Sure, Akio kind of talks him off this theory, but if I'm learning anything about this series, it's that nothing is said or done by accident. In this case, we're supposed to believe Tomoya when he says this. Akio serves as the part of us that wants to doubt the supernatural elements of this series, but you've got to remember that it's produced by Ki, whose entire repertoire consists of slice-of-life stories with supernatural elements woven in. It makes no sense that this would be one of, if not the only, story they've made without that motif. In the finale, when Nagisa is revived, she all but confirms this theory in her own way.
Sometimes I wonder, what if this town was alive? What if it had thoughts and feelings like one of us? If it did, I think it would want to make the people who live here happy. When I look at how things have turned out for you and me, I feel like the town might have brought us together, that it might have made this miracle happen. But even if it's wonderful, I guess it's not really a miracle, is it? After all, this sort of thing happens every day. People who live here love this town and they find happiness here all the time. Even if it doesn't have thoughts, I think this town is still alive in its own way. I think it still loves the people who live here. I've grown up in this town. All of my memories and dreams are a part of it. In a way, I feel like it raised me.
I'm gonna suggest something that might sound a bit crazy, but just bear with me because by the end, I think it's all going to become that much clearer. I think Hikarizaka has a will of its own. Whether that will is formed from the collective will of its inhabitants or otherwise we'll likely never know, but that's hardly important right now. What matters is that if the town has a will, then it needs a way to communicate that will to its people. It needs a way to let them know about the light orbs. If you're unaware, the light orbs are magical items that appear whenever a person achieves true happiness, and, if collected, can make any wish come true. Collectively, they can bring about a miracle. Light orbs aren't collected on purpose, however. Rather, they're collected unconsciously and can only make true wishes from the heart reality. It also seems that specificity is required when making wishes, which explains why Katsuki could only stay with Misai forever in his original form, a cat, rather than in the form of a human. If she had wished for him to stay with her forever as a human, then he would have. It's cruel, isn't it? If Hikarizaka's will is for the town to be happy, but the only way it can communicate that will is by bonding with its citizens, then unfortunately that would mean some of its citizens would undoubtedly suffer. Nagisa is one of these victims, as is Ushio. We have no way of knowing, but I'd suggest that perhaps Katsuki is also one of them, as well as Kazuto Miyazawa, but he's less likely since we know his cause of death. I mention Kazuto only because it's his sister who tells Tomoya and Nagisa about the legend of the light orbs that's been passed down for generations in Hikarizaka, but the point is that it has been passed down for generations, meaning the people with whom the town bonded are not limited to Nagisa and Ushio. It can be inferred, however, that at the time when Nagisa was bonded, she may have been the only one who was bonded, as there's not a lot of people who are deathly ill with a strange sickness each winter, especially if we look at the doctor's reaction to the sickness. This isn't a common condition. It could be that only a handful of people or less are bonded each generation. It can also be inferred that the bond is passed down genetically as it is inherited from Nagisa to Ushio.
Dango, 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 dango.
So, the question stands. What the hell happened at the end of Clannad? I waited until now to recount the events because I needed to discuss the first scene and the Illusionary World before I could accurately explain. I'll be discussing the timeline in what I believe to be chronological order, but I'm leaving room for error because I have yet to play the visual novel, which may make this entire video moot. If you notice something I got wrong, please mention it in the comments below. We're going to start this timeline with World A, in which Tomoya and or Nagisa don't help any of their friends, they don't collect any light orbs, and their fate is pretty much the same as in the series. Tomoya meets Nagisa, they eventually begin dating, and then Nagisa dies after giving birth to Ushio. Ushio too dies after her sickness takes her when she was 5 years old. World A is made irrelevant here. It might continue onwards, it might not. In any case, it's none of our concern. Ushio's spirit, desperately wishing to see her father again, creates the illusionary world within the pocket dimension as a means of collecting light orbs from across the various other dimensions in order to grant her wish, but she forgets who she is soon after. Ushio continues to collect the orbs, creating the garbage doll for the spirit of Tomoya, who desperately wished to see his daughter again by any means necessary. I'd be willing to suggest that she did this using some of the light orbs, which would explain her life-giving abilities that the garbage doll lacks. She's not all-powerful, however, as when they try to build another vessel to give the garbage doll a companion, it fails to come to life because there is not another wayward spirit who can latch onto it. Tomoya's World A spirit, as I said, wanted to see his daughter again, so he inadvertently made his way to the illusionary world and his wish came true as a result. In trying to leave this world, Ushio and the garbage doll are unable to make it before winter comes. Even in this world, she's made immobile by the winter, causing the garbage doll to essentially relive the experience of seeing Ushio's condition worsen without even realizing it. Ushio dies once again, but not before remembering who she is and who the garbage doll is, singing Dango Daikazoku and calling him daddy before they're both destroyed, but the girl collapses into a bundle of light orbs, further symbolizing the theme the series has pushed since early on: children are the collective hopes and dreams of their parents. She tells the garbage doll to collect light orbs in order for a miracle to take place, and this marks the end of the illusionary world. I'd like to make a note that in episode 21 and 22 of the original Clannad, it's confirmed that Nagisa had and implemented the idea of performing a song at the end of the play about the illusionary world. It's initially designed as a throwaway gag, considering the song she chose was Dango Daikazoku, but that is exactly what happens. I am choosing to believe that Ushio used some or all of the light orbs in her possession to fulfill their wish of returning to Earth, which allowed a new world or timeline to form. If there was anything left, most likely they went inside Tomoya once he was reborn into the new world. It's then that World B is created, which is where the anime is set. In this world, everything is pretty much the same, except Tomoya and Nagisa help their big Dango family, unintentionally collecting light orbs. Both Tomoya and Nagisa have dreams of the illusionary world. Tomoya because he'd been there, Nagisa because she's connected to it in a small way, which explains how she knew about it for her play, and why Tomoya continued to have visions of it long afterwards. It should also be noted that in episode 20 of Clannad, Sanai asks if the fairy tale about the illusionary world is anything important, and Tomoya mentions he doesn't know why, but he gets the feeling that it is. In episode 5 of Afterstory, Katsuki seems overly attached to Tomoya, which I believe is evidence that he's been to the illusionary world. Someone who's so involved with the light orbs, even if his ties are shrouded in mystery, might be drawn to someone else who's been around them. This could also be why Fuko is so attached to Ushio, since I like to believe Fuko is only awake due to the influence of the light orbs. If I'm correct so far, then a quote by Nagisa in episode 15 of Afterstory could suggest how Nagisa knows the story of the illusionary world. She watched it happen.
A lot of things happen in life, some of them good and some of them bad. But no matter what, the tide will always come back to the shores again and again. And so I'll stand by watching, just as the shores watch the tide come and go.
In this scene, they're talking about the meaning of Ushio's name. Nagisa means shore, but Ushio means tide. At first, I think it's meant to foreshadow Ushio's birth killing Nagisa, But if you look at it another way, it could mean that Ushio, or the Tide, will continue to fight to reunite her family even after death. Nagisa will only be able to watch as she does so, however. I'm sure you're asking, how does Nagisa and Tomoya retain memories of their time spent in or around the Illusionary World? And to that I say, I think everyone in the town has some memories of their past incarnations, especially the main and supporting cast. In Season 1, Tomoya remarks to Tomoya that seeing him with Tsunohara was nostalgic, which could be because she remembers seeing them around in the World A timeline. In episode 20 of After Story, Fuko mentions she's committed Ushio's scent to memory, which explains her comedy routine with Coco in the final episode, where she smells a cute smell referring to Ushio. It could be that anyone directly associated with the light orbs is able to recall faint memories from another world where they existed. Applying this in a practical sense, it could be deja vu. Nagisa has Ushio, dies, and Tomoya falls into a deep depression until Ushio is 5 years old, at which point she's killed by the same sickness that took Nagisa. This time, Tomoya begs for Nagisa to save their child, and he's able to make a wish upon the collective of light orbs, which is able to bring about a miracle. I believe that, considering the light orbs need specificity, Tomoya was transported once again outside the bounds of time and space, where he was able to meet his Nagisa one last time. This is why she speaks to him as if this is goodbye. I mean, he did wish for Nagisa to save Ushio, and considering Nagisa was dead, the only other option was to bring Tomoya to Nagisa. His wish is tested. If he was able to let Nagisa go, if he truly regretted ever meeting her, then that wish would have been reality in World C. She would have never met Tomoya, never had Ushio, and would likely have died at some other point in the timeline. If he accepted her death was not his fault and embraced her as he does in the series, then his wish for her to survive would have been granted, turning back time and breaking Nagisa and Ushio's bond with the town, allowing for their happy family to become reality. It's then that World B Prime is created, a world exactly the same as the original World B, but with Nagisa and thereby Ushio freed from their bonds, a world where the big Dango family can live in peace without sickness or sadness. It can be implied, if this is correct, that the sea of light orbs Nagisa and Tomoya see in the final episode is meant to show us that the will of the town has been accomplished. There's no more need for the town to bond with anyone, as it has nothing left to communicate. Everyone in the town has achieved true happiness, and now everyone in the town can enjoy said happiness. This is supported by the montage that plays over the palm of a tiny hand in the final episode, where we see all the people Tomoya and Nagisa helped achieve true happiness over the course of the series. It's confirmed that all of their stories continued as we saw them, and their light orbs were collected and used for something beautiful. That's the cool thing about this series. You may be thinking right now that I'm severely overthinking it, and I very well could be doing just that, but that doesn't make me wrong. It's clear that the writing staff didn't give us any information we didn't need to solve the mystery. While the ending is indeed left ambiguous, there are enough hints revealed throughout the series that we're safe thinking this is the accurate story. It's revealed in the summary episode at the end of After Story that Tomoya has memories of World B and losing Nagisa and Ushio, but they're scattered and he doesn't quite know where they're from. It could also be implied that World B Prime Ushio has memories of the Illusionary World, and perhaps even memories of dying over and over again, but most likely those will be forgotten as she grows older. I'd actually love it if Ushio eventually came to own a stuffed doll shaped like the garbage doll, but that's just wishful thinking. It's finally over for them. They've escaped their fate, and all is well. Thanks for watching Anime Ambush! What do you think about this explanation? Was there anything I didn't touch on or failed to understand correctly? Let me know in the comments below, and if you want to see more videos like this one, be sure to subscribe by hitting that big red button. If you really love me, you can become my patron and help financially support my content, or you can share this video with your friends. If you've made it this far, I want you to tell me what you would wish for if you collected enough light orbs. Until next time, this has been Pixelation, reminding you to stay pixelated.